And then I was like, what is a CISO? What the hell does a chief information security officer do? Who are they? So I was like, can I get coffee with this person? And when I talked to him, I was like, oh, wow. I was like, so you're telling me your job is to do all this stuff to try to stop all the things that I would like do on the computer when I was a kid. And I was like, and that's a job. Ross and I were joking the other day that like security is a funny business where people are very willing to buy tools to help them look at a problem, not necessarily solve it. I mean, that's not true for everybody, but I think it's I think solving it is harder. But I was like, why do you need a DLP tool, first of all? If you do need one, it probably isn't the thing you need most. But you just need to actually manage like why data is getting produced in the first place, or if it even has any business use. If everything was zero sum, we wouldn't be here. Okay, period. If everything was zero sum, we would only get so far as the wheel. I think for human civilization to get to this point, we have to have an abundance mindset. And that doesn't just necessarily mean more is better. It just means there's always more if you can think about things differently.
Hi, Nick. Welcome to Be Fearless podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I just want to give a brief introduction to our listeners, who you are, what you do, what we are doing in the studio.
Sure.
So Nick is actually CISO at Scrut Automation, and he leads security, compliance, privacy, and resilience effort. Your career spans through Department of Homeland Security, Expedia Group, and now security leadership at Scrut. And you also support the startup ecosystem as a venture partner at Tidal Ventures. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Tidal Ventures.
Tidal Ventures. And syndicate co-lead at Venture in Security. So it's a pleasure to have you here. And maybe just to kick things off, the first question would be, you have such a diverse career, work in so many industries, and now in the startup world. But what was the spark that led you into cybersecurity in the first place?
It's not a super crazy story. It was really just when I was like a kid, like the first computers that I had access to. I just really liked, I think, trying to make them work and trying to figure them out. And a lot of times, the funny thing is, I had to learn a lot more about computers just to make them work well, because they didn't work well. To get something out of them, to play a game, to get a game I wanted, to get a game I didn't have or something. And I was just really motivated. And then over time, being in like middle school or elementary school, it's like, doing funny things, hacking the computers at school, or like sending messages to other people in the computer lab while they're on the computers and stuff like that. Then that became like sending denial of service attacks to my friends' computers on their home computers, and getting into it that way. And then I didn't even know what cybersecurity was. I didn't know what security was. I just was like, this is just computers. This is just how computers work. And then I learned about what cybersecurity was for the first time in college. I had an internship at a nonprofit called the World Affairs Council. And someone had created a phishing website copying the nonprofit's website. And so I just did some research on like where the phishing site was hosted and how it was being done. And back then it was pretty manual what these I guess threat actors were doing. I like figured that out, and then my supervisor had introduced me to the CISO for the city of Seattle. And was like, oh, maybe he can help us send down like a fancy looking takedown notice to these to the hosting providers, because we figured out where they were. And then I was like, what is a CISO? What the hell does a chief information security officer do? Who are they? So I was like, can I get coffee with this person? And when I talked to him, I was like, oh, wow. I was like, so you're telling me your job is to do all this stuff to try to stop all the things that I would like do on the computer when I was a kid. And I was like, and that's a job.
I'm already proficient in this.
Yeah, I was like, that's crazy. Yeah. So I never went to school formally necessarily for it, but it was just something I was super interested in. And I just never thought I could have a career doing that. I think that was a crazy thing. I mean, I didn't even believe I could have a career doing it after I met him. I just thought it was like something interesting.
It's super fun, and whoever I'm speaking to, everyone has such a different starting point, because back in the time there weren't that many people studying cybersecurity, right? So, but do you think having this a bit of a attacker mindset gave you an edge as you were going through your career?
I think it helps. The cat and mouse game really started with like my father was really strict growing up. How much TV I could watch, what I could do, everything. One of the things when I was in elementary school is like he would set a timer on the television. So he had a timer that he plugged the TV into, and it would turn off at a certain time.
Okay.
And he figured, like, you know, when I was, I don't know, 6 years old, I would just have to live with it. And then it would frustrate me. And before he'd come back from work, I'd try to mess with the timer to get it. So I was like, oh, there's like an override switch. And then he was like, and then he didn't know it until one day he came home early, saw me like switch it back. And then I was like, oh, shoot. So then he just took the power cable. Yeah. And then I just found another cable. Yeah. And then I think he just cut off the thing altogether. So it was just like this constant arms race to like, yeah, for me, it was always about like, it was just like on the computer, like playing a game I wanted to play that had just come out or something, or maybe getting access to a game that wasn't available in the US, but was available in another country that I wanted to play, and and getting it to work, even though like it's not supposed to be available. I'll say it like that. And then, yeah. And so I always had this like strong motivation to just like solve problems, where I was like, I don't care that you don't necessarily want me to do it. If I think it's important for me to do, I'll figure it out. Anyways, it's great training, because then it's just kind of like, you can never assume anything you do in security is just going to work. And even if you're going to do it, you can't assume that it's going to stop everyone the same way. Just like, and it really depends. But I think it goes back to like, what is more important for your business, though? You can't stop everything, everyone, everywhere. You can stop the things that matter to your business, and that's what you need to focus on. And every business is different. You know, when I was Expedia, that's very different than what I'm doing at a startup, which is like a B2B SaaS company versus like a B2C e-commerce company versus the government.
Yeah, I think you really do have to have this creative edge, whether you're an attacker or defender. Even your story with your father, right? There was this constant battle. And if we translate into today's world, this is how the whole field operates, where you have to do it. But maybe tell a little more, how did you get into Expedia? How was it? What was the step that brought you there and made you think afterwards to shift to the startup world?
Yeah. So I was at Homeland Security during the Obama administration, doing cybersecurity strategy and working on the NIST cybersecurity framework, amongst a bunch of other initiatives. So it was the first time, you know, it was being worked on and being developed, and then there were workshops around the country to create the NIST cybersecurity framework, and DHS, Commerce / NIST were partnering on this as part of the administration's executive order. And that was super interesting and super different. And at the time, people were like, I don't know, do we need this? Don't we need this? And it's funny now, people like refer to it all the time.
Yeah.
I was just talking to some former colleagues from both DHS and at Commerce who were there at the time. And we were joking like how, you know, it's crazy at the time. We were like, you know, maybe no one will ever care, or people will, and people do care. While I was there, my specialty was on kind of just cyber risk analysis, just generally speaking, applying that to, how do we think about federal, state, local cyber incident response strategies? Like from a risk perspective, like what should we prioritize? How should we think about that? Or at the time in the department, there were a lot of different approaches and different sort of practices across the department in risk management and risk assessment, but they were all like a little different. And there was trying to understand like what is the same or different and how should we like optimize that, or what kind of outcomes are they driving towards? And so I did all this risk stuff, and then Expedia, I had a really good friend and former colleague, and we were interns at the city of Seattle together on information security. Because that CISO was only the second CISO ever for the city of Seattle. I mean, that's how like new the job, was at the time. He had gone to work at Expedia, and they were looking for someone to do cybersecurity risk at like an enterprise scale. And they were like, I think asking him like, do you know anybody? And so he mentioned me, and they had reached out and were talking to me. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I just moved to DC. It's interesting. It's different. I'm already from Seattle, and they're based in Seattle. So actually the first time I talked to them, I was like, no, I'll stay here. And then they came back like 6 months later, like, no, really, like you should come here. Like we have all kinds of problems.
Yeah.
And then so I actually did go back. Actually, it was thanks to my wife then at that point when we were dating. She's like, it's pointless just to stay in DC just because.
It's
so like,
DC, yeah.
I was like, okay, I guess. Because I think I had this like arbitrary mindset where like, well, I'm from Seattle. Why should I go back so soon? I need to go do something far away from here.
Yeah.
But then I went back. So Expedia recruited me, and I was like, okay, this is super interesting. I was like, what is this travel website? Why would they need risk assessment? What do they have? When I got there, I was like, wow, they have every kind of programming language, so many different kinds of technology. They had acquired companies over like 25 plus years by that point, and now almost 30. And there was just a ton of technology. And so it was super interesting to go from, like talking about policy and cybersecurity at a national level to talking about it at like a web application for this one team, for this web application for this one brand, and looking at the security architecture and reviewing that and doing threat modeling and, talking about we had a lot of Java applications. We had a lot of Linux infrastructure. And I had come from a lot of like Windows worlds. And so it was just like going headfirst into that. And like, how do we secure Linux? How do we secure like JavaScript applications? And how do we secure like hundreds and thousands of web applications, internal ones, external ones, ones that take hundreds of millions of, like monthly unique visitors and traffic. It was exciting. There was like just endless number of security challenges to solve. And then I guess going to startups, it was like, I'd been there. I guess time flies. When I started, I was just doing kind of all of that. And then it went into like working on all the M&A stuff at Expedia. So did a lot of all the cybersecurity due diligence for all the M&A, and we did a lot of M&A in that time. We did like, I think almost $8 billion in M&A in 5 years. And so it was kind of crazy. Did all that. So worked on all sorts of security problems. We like got rid of our Splunk SIM license. We built our own SIM and sort of XDR architecture in-house, and like built a product management function and practice inside the company. And I just went headfirst into product and all this stuff. Fast forward to like, at some point I was like, I want to go try something else. I'm kind of getting tired of security. I've been doing it for 5 years. And then I went into like corporate development, corporate strategy, and then commercial strategy for the company's technology. So our entire platform. And we were kind of restructuring the entire company, doing something what a lot of tech companies are doing just now, where it's like, we need to re-platform, we have all this M&A, we need to put it all together.
Yeah.
It's funny how a lot of big tech companies don't really have different life cycles. They really have like one sort of path they take, I think, for how they grow. And I think I just got tired of, there's too much politics, and I get it comes with the territory at a big company. But I think for me, politics are okay if there's a lot of problem solving.
Okay.
And if there's a lot of politics just for politics' sake without problem solving, then I'm like, I'm done.
Okay.
I'm going to go to startups.
Yeah.
And I had never worked in startups before. And so I was a CISO at one Series A startup before I joined Scrut, which at the time was a seed stage startup. And I never look back. Like, I think the amount of things you can get done in the same amount of time is incredible. The time compression, I think that just comes from fewer random layers of decision making, fewer decision by committee, fewer meetings for meeting's sake. It was kind of like life changing to just not sit in meetings all day, trying to do all these meetings, because the hope is that like if you can convince and align all these stakeholders, you can go do the job you're supposed to do. I was like, what if you could just go do the job you're supposed to do? I mean, and communicate accordingly, but not with 100 people. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. It looks like, layers of complexity are just being removed at the smaller companies. What do you think you learned at bigger companies that enabled you to accelerate in the startup world? And do you think would you be able to be where you are right now if it wasn't for being?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, no, I mean, I think I learned a lot, and like some of the most useful things have been, I guess it's possible to like be in a big company and learn nothing. I mean, you could be in any company and learn nothing. You could be in any company and learn something. I think what I learned the most, though, was like, wow, there's so many problems, and I got to work on a lot of problems. The early parts of the company, when I joined Expedia, it was half the size it was when I left, both revenue, people, everything. And so there was a lot more flexibility and discretion. So I just worked on all kinds of projects. It's like, oh, we need to go deploy PCI compliant infrastructure for our payment stack. We had never done that before, and it was 2014, 2015. AWS didn't have many customers who were doing that. And so we're like, we'll go do that. And we had our own payment stack. There was no Stripe. We're like taking credit card information, processing these payments directly with the payment providers. And we're doing it in the billions of dollars. And so it was like, okay, we'll just go figure it out. We'll just go sit down in a conference room for a month and just figure it out, working with teams from the engineering team for the brand and the product side with the information security team. I think the things I learned were like, there's a lot of problems you have, there's some reasons for why they got to be that way. And then I think getting conviction on like, there are things worth doing. There are things not worth doing. And like, when does it apply and when does it make sense? Just because they're like a big software company doesn't mean everything they did made sense, but like what made sense for what they were doing. I think it was more the process that was useful and like the journey versus like the actual thing. Every company has a different product. Even companies in the same industry do the same thing differently.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. When I was at Expedia and Booking.com's technology stack look very different, even though they sell the exact same thing. So it doesn't mean like, oh, if I like work at one big tech company, I can go to any startup and just do the exact same thing. But I think how you think about like, what problem are you trying to solve? And then how do you go about what is the best and most optimal way to like solve that problem from a technology, from people perspective and whatever. That process, I think, of like discovery and like iterating quickly. I think that is transferable. And I think wherever you learn that, whether you learn at a big company, you learn at a small company. Nice thing about the big company was there's just so many projects to work on. It was really like, kind of pick up space that you were like, you're like, I want to solve these kind of problems, you could go deep on that. You could go deep on trying to solve bot management at scale, because even then the vendors that we had, whether whoever they were, I don't have to say, but like they weren't solving all these problems. And I mean, and a lot of problems still aren't being solved today, and half of that is like technology is changing quickly, but the other half has nothing to do with technology. It's just like implementation, people, culture, choices that they've made and preferences that they have. But I think understanding that it's no different at a startup. Startups have problems too. And I think if you can understand like what is, just having conviction about what is important to solve. I think for me, there's a lot of things where I have some colleagues, at different startups that I've worked at, where it's kind of like, if they've never encountered this that many times before, they might be a little more reluctant. But, I was like, if you've seen it enough times, like you don't have to spend too long thinking about it. I think there's many smart people have, created quotes along the lines of like, there are problems where it's like, if you can change it, if you can undo it, or it's like you can change it quickly, then make the decision as fast as possible. And then if it's like a problem that's going to be like really hard to undo, once you do it, or the thing you do, then make sure you do enough due diligence and take your time. I think that was like a Jeff Bezos one, but I think it makes sense.
It does.
In a lot of tech companies, because there's a lot of problems you presumably are trying to solve that either some have been, some haven't been, and just knowing like where to spend your time. Every startup wants to innovate and everything, but there's a lot of things that aren't important for them to innovate because that's not what they're solving for their customer. Just because you're smart doesn't mean you should spend time doing something that no one cares about. Unless you're just independently wealthy.
Some people choose to do that.
Yes, which is fine.
I think at the end of the day, you really have to have this agile mindset. Whether it was when you just started working in Expedia, you were practically just thrown into the water and ask, hey, learn how to swim through all of these challenges, right? And I think if you're not agile enough, it's going to be difficult, whether you're a bigger company, smaller company, because this whole space requires you to be so flexible. But do you think, what are some of the unique challenges that you saw specifically in travel tech versus some other industries?
In e-commerce travel tech, you get like some version of what a lot of software companies get, plus what a lot of retail companies get. Because I mean, that's, I guess, technically what e-commerce is. So you deal with a lot of different kinds of fraud. And because Expedia has a marketplace, you have consumers on one side and you have suppliers on the other side. So you have all the usual like supplier fraud. There's like people creating fake hotels, trying to list it on the platform. That's anything any marketplace will have to deal with, whether it's like Airbnb or Amazon or something else. There's fake suppliers selling fake products or selling, products that aren't theirs or something else, or products that they're never going to ship. So you have to deal with supplier fraud. You have to deal with consumer fraud. You have to deal with like people making charges on stolen credit cards, or you have people trying to gamify or like basically make fraudulent gift card transactions, or buying gift cards with fraudulent credit cards and then spending them before you catch it and all this stuff. And then, because on the consumer side in the US, like the banks are very pro-consumer. And so like they're like, consumers aren't liable for the fraudulent transactions. But then as a merchant, you have to be very careful, because like, well, that's all fine and dandy. That just means the consumers get the benefit of the doubt, whether it's fraudulent or real. And you have to kind of prove it that it is fraudulent. So you have to do that programmatically. You have to do that at scale. When you do $88 billion in transactions in a year, how do you do that in a way that solves your problems? And yes, there are vendors out there that sell solutions to help you with that, but they never solve everything, because it's really specific on like how your business operates. So we had to solve a lot of that. And then from a from like a cybersecurity kind of standpoint, we had normal problems in terms of like, we have big offices, lots of employees, a lot of IT to secure. But I think on the travel space, it's like the product is, it requires a lot to happen. It's like Expedia doesn't own any planes or hotels, but Expedia has to sell like seats on planes and rooms in hotels.
Yeah.
So Expedia has to connect to like a bazillion different companies. And like everyone thinks like, oh, if you just connect to this one hotel brand, it's like, that's everything. Hotel brands are not operated in a like monolithic way. Hotels are like this, there's like a corporate version where there's like the brand itself that owns the rights to the brands. Then there's franchise owners and property owners. There's real estate investment companies that own groups of properties in multiple brands. How you get the hotel room inventory data that they have onto your platform means you have like all these custom integrations and connections. And they're not all very standardized. They're not all very great. Some are like, direct connections into our like data, into Expedia's data center. Some of them are like cloud to cloud. And a lot of them also have really like non-standard, non-uniform APIs. Or if they're even APIs, it could be as bad as a lot of other kind of ways to, I guess, send data. And because of that, but there's no way to sell travel without doing that.
Yeah.
Right. There are vendors who will aggregate that inventory data and sell access to it. And that's been established for a long time. But because Expedia is a tech company, they kind of use those players, but also have their own direct connections. I mean, you just have to from a defensibility standpoint. But that means you have a lot of connections. You have to trust with third parties. But I mean, the company is super invested in those connections, whether or not they're perfectly secure, because it's super critical to making money. And the speed is like crazy because like, in B2C e-commerce travel, like you're making money every like millisecond. But every millisecond something doesn't work or the traffic stops or something breaks because of a security incident, you're losing lots of money. Because like you measure how much money you're making by the millisecond. It's
insane to think of these volumes.
It's insane. And like you can think of like B2B, it's like you have these like 12, 24, 36 month contracts moving at like the pace of a snail. Whereas like in B2C, people are buying things like they're buying something right now. They're buying something right now. Someone somewhere is buying something. And then if it stops working, it's like, oh, people are not buying something. So like it can be good one quarter and really awful the next quarter. So that was a little stressful. I don't miss that. I think protecting that is stressful.
I can imagine. I mean, first of all, there is so much of a third-party risk management that's involved in this process. And then data protection, I'm sure, is a big one with so many integrations going on. What do you think when it comes to data protection, right? You just touched upon that there is so much risk involved. So when you, let's say, just joined the group versus where it was going and where you are today, do you see any positive versus negative changes when it comes to data?
Yeah, that's a funny one, especially with like all the excitement around AI.
Exactly.
I think there was a ton of data then. There's a ton of data now. I think the thing that changed, the most obvious change was like it just got easier to store. Everyone's like, oh, we could store it. It used to be limited by like how much hardware we had, especially for big companies that had on-prem hardware. And on-prem isn't inherently bad depending on what you're doing because it can be a lot more affordable than using SaaS or cloud service providers for everything. Anyone who's ever used Datadog or anything else that charges by usage base, it's like it's easy to onboard, but you better be smart about what logs you put in, because if you put in too many logs that you don't need, you have a huge bill. I mean, that's true for any usage base. I mean, AWS, GCP, it's not unique, but I think that's just one where I don't know if people appreciate that until they get hit with the bill. But I think, when I joined, they're used to the timeline for like adding massive amounts of storage for like enterprise data warehouses to do machine learning at scale. I remember putting in a request. I was like, hey, we're going to need this much data index, this much storage, cold storage, like, this much throughput per day. Like, we're going to need 2 terabytes per day, and we're going to need up to 4 to 6 terabytes of throughput per day. And then we're going to index like 14 days of data so that we can use that for our in-house SIM that we built. And they're like, it's going to take like 16 months or something to procure and set up. And it's like, well, that's absurd. We just built it in AWS and spent a fortune. But yeah. But I think that happened, and now it's like just way easier. It's even easier. And there's a lot of great, the different database, I think products out there are super great. There's a lot more options now that are like purpose built for different use cases, for different types of data that you need to store, whether it's like, are you building like a search use case? Are you building like an analytics use case? Or are you just trying to do processing? Are you using like documents, other just kind of storage? I think something that hasn't changed, though, is people are no better now at like labeling, tagging, classifying their data. I think the hard work it doesn't seem like I don't have great examples. I'm not aware of any of the things I'm aware of. There's not a lot of good examples of where like, people have like, whether they're doing it in an automated or non-automated way, have like really good understanding of their like data ontology, how they're classifying and producing data, how they're consuming that data, and how they're maintaining it. And so like, it doesn't matter how powerful the models are if like you have like crap data. And you don't even understand, if you have crap data, you probably don't understand your business case or your problem that you're trying to solve at scale with technology. Like, you'll never solve it.
Yeah.
And you're just collecting a lot of crap data, or you don't know how to use it. And that's true for security as much as it is for, marketing or any other part of the business. So it's easy to collect, easy to store. Hard to use if people don't know what it is. And then it's hard to protect.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's like, I think the tricky part is, if I find like, while there's an innumerable number of ways to try to quantify the risk of like the data that you're trying to protect, like the number of, combination of like unique PII records, especially for like a B2C business, is a good, reasonable way to look at it. The number in total, and then how and where it is stored, will affect like the likelihood of it getting access. But I think most people just don't even know that.
Yeah, it's all about it's all about also processes, right? Some people think, hey, I just have this tool and it's going to solve all my problems.
Yeah,
but
if
then,
only.
Yeah.
We bought a lot of tools.
Yeah.
I bought so many tools. We were like a Palo Alto, Cisco, FireEye. Man, like, we were a customer of every company. And it wasn't all solved.
Yeah. That's why it's like having the right processes in place. Yeah. It's so crucial. And then having that right team that is able to filter through what is needed, what is not needed. And since we're already talking about data, right? I'm sure whoever you're speaking to, or maybe even yourself, everyone right now is talking about generative AI data leakage, right? How do you see the approach to it has changed, and whether you see people being more open to using this kind of tools or a little less open?
The tools to protect data leakage, or the tools that leak data?
The former.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Interesting, like one part of it, looking at it from both a user and then an investor side, is there's so much interest. I feel like generative AI made DLP great again. I feel like everyone out of nowhere rebranded data loss prevention as like
generative
AI protection.
Yeah. And it works. I think it works.
At the most basic level, sure. It's like before, whether you're trying to find data where it wasn't supposed to be on like file servers and employee laptops. That was a lot of DLP tools back then. Now it's like DLP tools that are just doing like, we're preventing like input and output from LLMs of sensitive data. Either I've seen it all now, like at the endpoint. So it's like another desktop agent or it's, or it's browser based. There's a lot of browser based extensions where it's like, okay, we'll like monitor your browser inputs and then we'll block it there. Then there's network ones where like we'll install an appliance. Then there's like reverse proxy ones where you send all this like web traffic. We'll do that at that layer. Assuming though the web proxy is set up in a way to do like, like some kind of for encrypted traffic, or it's just going to like be a little noisy if it's just doing it on metadata. And then there's ones trying to do it where it's a little slower, where it's like, okay, we're going to do it on an API connection with that SaaS tool or that thing directly. Or we're going to encapsulate it and serve it up to you. And so it's like, this is like a trusted, kind of LLM agent for you to use. I think it's funny, like how excited people are about just like preventing credit card numbers from going into LLMs. Because I think we have a lot of problems, and like that's only one small problem. And I think, I don't know. I think people are definitely willing to adopt and use these things. But I think that's because a lot of people don't actually know how their companies are using LLMs. I think they just say Gen AI and they think of like ChatGPT and Claude or something. Some companies are building products with LLMs. Some companies are just consuming products that are built with or using LLMs. I think people just have to be very clear on like, what are they using? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to protect? I think all the different data leakage solutions, though, how useful they are varies by who they're for. I think it's confusing when someone is trying to prevent like data leakage from like employee usage, tries to pitch it to product companies that need to protect like their customer usage. So like, I'm CISO for a B2B SaaS company. We have to manage data leakage into LLMs or with respect to LLMs for our users. I don't have a big army of like, a workforce of like 10,000 people who are using LLMs that I need to go like monitor, like to X degree. I have to prioritize my risk. I'm like, hey, I need to like go protect customer data. I need to protect how their data could or could not be used to make sure it complies with the consent that they have or have not given based on the kind of the terms of services and the user agreement that they have with us as a business selling B2B software. And then for our employees, we have to look at like, we have a remote first workforce, and, we have to manage that accordingly. And like, what do we balance in terms of like what kind of tools they use? And if there are tools that they need, that they use, we tend to just want to then provide them those tools, but in a way that we have some kind of recourse or legal obligation. So if that means using like some kind of, application that uses LLMs, then it's making sure that we're using like paid versions. We're using versions where we have controls. Because, you can protect it in like on the device, on the agent, you can reverse proxy it, but then someone just goes to an LLM application on their phone or they just use their personal computer. So, I mean, like if someone wants to use it, they're going to use it. you're not going to stop them. So it's like if they were trying to do research for work using an LLM and you're like, no, you can't. We don't use any LLMs here at work. They just use their personal computer. I mean, and they'll copy and paste it. I don't know. It's like they're not dumb. And so I think there's a balance of like, kind of, and different businesses have different problems. So like, we're not a bank. If you're a bank, maybe it's a little different if you're doing like healthcare or something else. But then I think it just behooves you to be more on top of like, what is your company's use case? And like, are these data leakage, like data loss prevention tools, like, are they really going to help you prevent loss? Are they buying you time? Or like, why is that data getting produced in the first place? Where is it coming from? I think if you just say we have a potential for data loss, but we put this tool, but we don't really know where the data loss is coming from, then you have a problem. I think, Ross and I were joking the other day that like security is a funny business where people are very willing to buy tools to help them look at a problem, not necessarily solve it. I mean, that's not true for everybody, but I think I think solving it is harder. But I was like, if you need a DLP, why do you need a DLP tool, first of all? If you do need one, it probably isn't the thing you need most, because you just need to actually manage like why data is getting produced in the first place, or if it even has any business use. That requires like understanding your company's business to like a degree that you may not have the time to, or you're too stressed out, or you have other fires to solve. So.
Yeah, I think right now, to be fair, is the age of granular control. As you were saying, like users are not dumb. In case they want to use certain generative AI sites, they just go from the personal device. So I think right now, the responsibility of whatever tools are out there is to be granular enough and make it, let's say, you can use this tool, you can type your queries, but you cannot paste or upload files that contain sensitive information. I think this is more, more tailored approach to this whole data leakage problem. Plus, as you mentioned, so many companies don't really know what exactly they need to control. And there is quite a lot of, I think, complexity.
Yeah, I think, and it was always like that before. Like DLP tools have been around for a long time. I have a colleague who worked on DLP tools like more than 10 plus years ago. And, I think there was complexity back then but a lot of people were just like, oh, we'll just turn it on and find credit cards where they're not supposed to be because we have to be PCI compliant. That's what we did at Expedia. And we had to prove to the auditors that we were monitoring, scanning, and detecting for PCI data where it wasn't supposed to be, and it was like a super slow, long, complicated, compute-intensive process, especially for on-prem hardware. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's great. I think there's more stuff now, but there's, it's like there's more solutions now than there ever was before. But I think the bigger question is like, are security practitioners and operators asking any better questions about what problems they need to focus on and solving with all these solutions? Because not every solution is your solution that you need. You need the right ones. And like the hope is that you get the ones you need the most versus the ones you don't need. But that depends on like, how hard are you thinking about what your company needs? Yeah. Because every company is different.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it just makes me think if there was somewhat like a solution that would match make, because at times it's hard for security teams to really articulate what are the problems and put in the order of priority.
Yeah.
And then for vendor to come in into conversation, and they might have like multiple use cases they can solve, but which one is the most important, right? So that matchmaking would really make sense.
I've seen some people try to solve that, but I think the incentives are such that, are they really trying to solve it? Or are they trying to like sell leads? And so I think that's the tricky part. However they do that, there's a lot of different options out there.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but like the blind leading the blind. So it's like someone who isn't super informed for any variety of reasons, not because they're not trying, but because it's hard on like what their company's like true risk are that they should be prioritizing, or having a deep understanding of their company's threat model. And then like a vendor trying to help them get the best solution that they need and out of the things that they offer. If their customer doesn't understand, the prospect doesn't understand that, it is going to be like a guessing game of guessing games of guessing games for like, you're like playing 21 questions with someone who like doesn't even know what every answer is going to be a question.
Yeah.
They're like, what do you think I should do? And then they're like, well, that's not the right answer, because it's like, don't ask me. I don't run your environment. And moving, when I joined the previous startup and this startup now, you know, sometimes occasionally I get questions from customers about how to manage their risk. And it's like, I mean, you know, there's definitely advice that can be shared and frameworks and kind of methodology, but sometimes it's like, look, you know, you actually work there.
Yeah.
You can like spend some time and think about this. You shouldn't be asking your vendor like or somebody else, not because people don't want to help you. I think there's a lot of incredible security professionals who work on the vendor side of I mean, because a lot of them were former, I think, security folks from the customer side. So it's like, look, we're all in this together. But I think it's like you're asking kind of an impossible question. I mean, I can tell you what I think. I can tell you based on the information you provide me. But my advice is only as good as what you know. So it's like any doctor you go see for like your kind of general day-to-day checkup will tell you like their prognosis is only as good as the information you give them. If you happen to accidentally leave out some important piece of information about a symptom or something and you lack the specificity that they need to make that prognosis, it's not like they're trying to give you the wrong prognosis, but it's just like they don't know what they don't know about what you could have told them that you forgot.
Yeah.
Same goes for like security professionals who are like, how am I solving this? How am I managing this? What am I managing? What is my problem? You know, and I think there's a lot that could be done there. And I don't think that requires any kind of magic. Yeah. It is just the hard work of the job.
It is the hard work, and I wish at a certain point there will be something that is going to able to read the mind of security teams and structure it for them and say, hey, this is something we need.
Yeah.
We have this little tradition, Nick, on our podcast where typically our previous guest asks question for our next guest. So our previous guest asked this question to you. What's your plan for life after being a CISO?
It's a good question. I think for me, it is whatever it is where I get to do work, and whether it's work in like the conventional sense or work in just like the most general, I guess, definition of the term, where I get to work with people that I like. Like I just like, you know, for me, ever since leaving Expedia, like it's not about titles or it's about whatever. It's all been about, do I get to work with people who are like trying to solve problems, who like genuinely care about like what they're trying to do? Yeah. And I think it's generally not evil. Then, you know, for me, I think that's like the greatest place to be. And I find that for me doing that, even without knowing like what the future entails, gets me to the place that I'll want to be, that I'll most want to be. Because I think there's kind of a process of like, if you knew the greatest extent of what the future could hold, and you could define that without selling yourself short, then sure, go ahead and do that. But like I find looking backwards in my life, 99% of the time, what ends up happening exceeds any expectations I had 5 years prior.
Oh, that's a good place to be.
But if I left it to my imagination, perhaps I need to dream bigger. But I also think that like, but it's okay to not have like, I think specificity for the 5-year plan or whatever is like is purely directional, just like any startup, right? It's a hypothesis that like, this is where we'll go 5 years from now, based on everything we know today. This is how we'll grow. This is going to be like our margin profile, whatever. But you know, like stuff changes, stuff happens. You learn stuff along the way, and then and it's not all bad stuff. And like pivoting is not a bad thing. But I think like, you know, for my career, it's like I've gained so much from just kind of following. I think just doing what feels right, you know, and with the right people. And then when I do that, I feel like I'm in the best place I can be for whatever to happen that I don't know I will want to do. So like, I don't have to know, you know, like, do I want to go be like a bread baker in the French countryside? I don't know. I do like bread and but I just want to, I think, do what is both a combination of fun and meaningful.
Yeah, this is very much abundance. I think this abundance mindset, because so many
I hate zero sum mindsets, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. Anyone who has like a zero sum mindset can like, I don't know, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Because I think if everything was zero sum, we wouldn't be here. Okay, period. If everything was zero sum, we would only get so far as the wheel. I think for human civilization to get to this point, we have to have an abundance mindset. And that doesn't just necessarily mean more is better. It just means there's always more if you can think about things differently. I read this random Substack post by this woman named Jenny Jang, and she talked about like, you know, I think she had a great framework that a lot of people have where there's like a first order mindset is like you do this to get this. And then a second order mindset is like you do this and then this happens. There's like some cause and effect. There's consequences to your actions. Both are normal ways to think. And then another one is like, what kind of world am I living in, or what kind of like framework or like system am I in that is creating this kind of output and result, where it's thinking like, what combination of decisions or beliefs do you have that lead to the things you may not actually want? You know, basically it's like a fancy way of saying, don't just take random generic advice just because it worked for someone else. You have to know what you care about, and if not just what you're doing today, but the set of what you're doing. Like actually, like what do you believe? What you know, what do you really want? And I spend a lot of time on that.
I mean, this is a great mindset, whether it's for security, for your personal life, direction of life.
I think especially in security too.
Especially in security. Especially in security. What question would you like to ask to our next guest?
Good question. Why are they still in security?
That's a nice
Why
one.
haven't they left?
What holds them?
What keeps them there?
Yeah.
I mean, it could be anything, but yeah.
That's a good question. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for being on our Be Fearless podcast. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. It's been great. It's been super fun.
Thanks.